Fingers crossed we are going live. I say that because, yeah, we seem to be going live because, as you may have heard, yesterday in Spain and Portugal, southern France, there was a complete power outage. And when I say power outage, I don't mean power outage in the normal sense of the word. I mean everything out. No way cell phones worked even. All the electricity to the cell masts disappeared. It was kind of an interesting experience, especially when the sun went down yesterday and it was just pitch dark. It was incredible. And actually quite in a way, I mean, obviously a lot of people were suffering, so I shouldn't be too light on this, but it was, weird things were going on. I mean, kids that you normally, I guess, are normally at home after school on the computer were out on the golf course playing golf, and on the tennis courts playing tennis, and paddle courts playing paddle, and there was lots of sport going on. And I guess a lot of the households weren't able to cook, and so there seemed to be a lot of fruit being eaten and vegetables, raw vegetables eaten as well in the clubhouse where everything else was shut. Just, and at night, with no artificial light anywhere, it was a starlit night. It was absolutely gorgeous. I keep looking across just to make sure my mobile phone's picture isn't letting me down, but yeah, it seems to be live. So anyway, as I say, fingers crossed, because everything burst back. Oh, it didn't burst back, and it staggered back into life about midnight last night, Spanish time, CET. And this morning, everything does seem to be working. It says excellent connection here. Famous last words. So if it suddenly just goes kaboom, don't blame me. It'll go, it'll be, what it is what I'm saying. So anyway, thank you very much, everyone involved in getting us back to where we were. It's a long time, actually. It's about 12 hours, I think, before everything was kind of back to normal again. And a lot of people trapped in electric trains, high-speed trains, suddenly just stopped. Everything went dark. Imagine if you're in a tunnel, and it was they had to have helicopters out looking for these trains because they didn't know where they were. Same with the undergrounds. Yeah, terrible. Hospitals, of course, always have good backup generators and continue to function, we hope. Again, fingers crossed. But there would have been other problems as well. So just hope everybody scraped through that okay. Right. What have we got? Power outage. I just want to talk about the Rally of the Canarias. Don't go away if you're a Formula One fan. We're going to do lots of Formula One stuff. But there is method to my madness here, because that rally was all tarmac, very, very quick sections. And I was watching it initially thinking, what is the point of all this? Because rally cars are at their best when they're sideways on gravel and you see all this brilliant car control going on. But then watching it after a while, I began to realize that it was basically today's version of the Targa Florio. The Targa Florio, if you aren't aware, is a phenomenal road race that used to be held in Sicily. It was a very, very long lap. And they only did about, 5 laps, I think, because it was so long, but it lasted all day. And the cars went off at timed intervals, so a little bit like a rally. But instead of stopping at the end of a stage, they just went round and through the start-finish line. Of course, they made pit stops. There were 2 drivers involved as well. But if you want the nearest equivalent to the Targa Florio, this is it, the Rally of the Canarias. We had a lot of chat on the last live stream, not a lot, a reasonable amount of chat about what can be done about Turn 1 in Saudi Arabia, where you can just go basically straight on, do what Max did and rejoin, then you get your penalty or whatever. And a lot of suggestions about putting in cones and things. Well, bear in mind, in the Canarias, they had a chicane there on the straight because it was just getting so quick. And the bollards were actually made of solid concrete. That's serious. And I did say, if you want to stop all that, just put a wall there, as Rob Wilson always says. And, solid concrete walls. Nobody hit them, interestingly, in the Canarias rally. So maybe we should revisit that whole business of solid walls on the outside of corners like Turn 1 in Saudi Arabia. Oh, I can hear the shouting now. No, never. What else have we got? Yeah, Lando Norris in the news again. Now I've got to say this, build up to this is my advice to Lando, not that he would ever listen, is say nothing, do nothing, get on with it, enjoy your motor racing and be self-critical within your own little world, but don't get involved with, having to do interviews and say things that you might regret, or indeed that you think might be positive for your own sports psyche or whatever you want to do. And guess who hasn't been listening? Here's Lando this week. I'm very confident that I can win races if I just give myself a better chance on Saturday. That's not stating the obvious. I'd like to know what is. Why would he need to say that? Is it like, there's a light bulb just gone off? In order to race well, I should qualify well. He does qualify quite well. He shouldn't be. See, that already there's a negative to that, because he actually does qualify quite well. He didn't obviously in Saudi Arabia, and he's had a few glitches, but generally speaking, he's been pretty good. So he needs to be super positive. It's like, you interview Jordan Spieth after a round when he's just shot 78, and he's capable of shooting a 67. And instead of saying and if you said to Jordan Spieth, said, Jordan, what happened on the 14th when you took a 9? He'll immediately change the subject to when he got the birdie on the 4th. And that's the way golfers are. They only think of the positive holes and the positive shots. So what's Lando doing there, dredging up all that stuff about, I've got to do a better job on a Saturday? Anyway, here's the other one. I want to be on pole. I want to win. I want to be perfect. Well, here's news, first of all. There's never been a perfect lap ever driven of a Grand Prix circuit, Lando. I presume you know that. I think I need to accept a little bit more that I'm not going to be perfect, and I'm making mistakes because I'm trying to be perfect rather than the other way around. Now, what I think he's saying there is, I'd rather go to bed at night knowing I've made a mistake because I was trying to be perfect, rather than because I'm imperfect. Again, this reminds me of, I have to call him Driver X because I'd be giving away confidentiality if I named him. But Rob Wilson is coaching Driver X, who's a Grand Prix driver, Grand Prix winner, very, very quick driver at Bruntingthorpe. And he's had a couple of good days. And on the third day, he says, I've invited my sports psychologist up. He's working with me now as well. And Rob looks at him and thinks, what's that? Okay, good. So he arrives, the sports psychologist, and Rob's, as ever, very friendly, very polite, very, welcome on board, blah, blah, blah. And Rob sort of sums up what he's trying to do with this driver, to which the sports psychologist says, that's really good. We're trying to make him a lot more fault tolerant, which I think is what Lando's saying there, isn't he? To which Rob replied, well, I'm not sure that's going to work then, because what we do here is try to eliminate the faults, which is, I would have thought, what it's all about. So rather than all this business about, I want to go to bed at night thinking I was almost perfect, but I didn't quite make it, rather than thinking, I made another mistake, why wouldn't he be thinking, how can I improve? And what am I doing wrong? What is Max doing going into turn 4 in Saudi Arabia that I'm not doing? I need to look at that. Surely that is what it is all about. And yet we got all this Lando speak now. And, the problem is, well, it's not a problem, but Lando could have another mega weekend in Miami like last year. He could get the pole and he could win the race. And then he'll say, you see, I told you, that's my attitude and it works. Now I'm back on course again. And of course it won't be. It'll just be that Oscar didn't have a great weekend and Max's Red Bull was even worse than normal. And that's why he won the race. And so that's the danger. I don't know why he's saying all this stuff. After Saudi Arabia, he should be keeping quiet, not stating the obvious or going down this path of what is the difference between a mistake and trying to be perfect. I mean, it's just nonsense to me. So anyway, we got that out of my system. What else have we got here? Yeah, I did a piece this week. It was basically excerpts from previous live streams and chats with Cameron about, put a little piece together about great circuits, what makes great circuits, in my opinion. And Martin Tomlinson, as he often does, immediately replied, well, you forgot Crystal Palace. Well, he's right. In my defense, Crystal Palace isn't known as the greatest of Formula One tracks, in that it didn't actually stage that many Formula One races, but it did in the late 50s, all non-championship races. Roy Salvadori, particularly quick there. But anyway, he sent me this lovely painting he's done of Crystal Palace 1972 Formula 2 race, really the last mega race run at Crystal Palace. There's Jody Scheckter in that beautiful Ralph Bellamy designed McLaren M21 Formula 2 car, leading Mike Hailwood in the equally beautiful Surtees TS10 Matchbox Formula 2 car, both powered by Ford Cosworth BDA engines. And Jody won that race. Only race that McLaren car won. It's a beautiful car, though, as you can see. And nicely captured by Martin, as ever. Lovely picture. Thank you very much indeed for that, Martin. Getting on to Miami this weekend. It is a sprint race. Oh, boring. Pirelli bringing the softest of the range again, which, and more importantly, softer than they were last year. So possibly a two-stop strategy this year in Miami. I suppose all the people that think pit stops are exciting will jump with glee. Very, very smooth, fine track surface there. Should be probably going to be pretty hot track surface as well. high top speed as well. There's a lot of chat about, I think Lance Stroll was quickest on the straight last year with DRS and a toe or whatever, 337, I think, something like that. Well, just as a reminder, I was just actually before it got dark, before we had anything else to do, I was reading a little bit again of Bernard Caillet's autobiography, a wonderful autobiography of Bernard Caillet, and he was talking about 57 Pescara when Sterling won in the Vanwall. Fangio was second in the Maserati. A very good win for Sterling. The last time Pescara was held, a lovely road race, very, very fast racetrack on the east coast of Italy, in the middle there, but very near where Jarno Trulli hangs out. And yeah, great race. But Bernard was saying, of course, we should all remember that in 1936, when he won the Pescara Grand Prix, Bernd Rosemeyer was clocked in the Auto Union on the straight there, long before they cut down the trees, lots of trees. He was clocked at 335 kilometers an hour. So, yeah, that kind of puts top speeds at Miami into perspective, doesn't it? 1936. No seatbelts, no helmet, just a cloth helmet, just bouncing around in the Auto Union, 335 kilometers an hour. What do you think about that? Ayman Rehman was one of our questioners in the last live stream, asking a very good question about the safety car and what happens to the safety car after the field sets off on the opening lap of the race. Because surely there must be some circuits where the field catches the safety car before it gets back into the pits. And I initially said, oh yeah, it just goes back to the pits. And I suddenly thought, Spa, Brazil, there are going to be other places where it's going to be touch and go. So I rang one of my race engineer mates, and he immediately said, oh, same as me. Yeah, it just goes back in the pits. And I said, well, what about these longer circuits? He said, oh, it's a good question, actually. Never really thought about that. I need to check. I'll go over the onboards of the safety car and see what they do from Spa. Haven't heard back yet. So as soon as I do, I'll let you know. But it's quite a good question. Just shows these live streams are very good, aren't you? Because you guys all start to, you think, oh, what can I ask Windsor next? And somebody's asked that. We've gone too far down that. Let's ask him something really obscure. And here we are, very good. Oh, one thing I would say is that going back to the Canarias, the rally, the Hyundais were absolutely hopeless. You couldn't really tell. I mean, they kept saying, oh, you can see the car. But, they're going so quickly on tarmac that if you've got understeer, they're correcting the understeer before you can even see it. Well, you can't see it anyway. And so they all looked about the same. But the Hyundais were much slower, purely because they were understeering more. Tires were then overheating and they were losing grip. So the whole grip level was down compared with the Toyotas. And they weren't allowed to make fundamental changes to the differential, which is the thing that would have solved the problem, because the diff wasn't allowing them when they come out of the power or use the power to get the back end to kill the understeer. So they didn't have that balance and they couldn't do it because that's the regulation. But the question arises, how Hyundai, with all their resources and all their people, and the testing they did in the Rally Granada, which was also tarmac, they did that with all three drivers, how they could go to the Canarias with the wrong diff in the car. Cyril Abitboul, please advise, I think. Cyril, of course, used to be around in Formula One, running the Lotus Renault F1 team, I think it was then. And I'm not sure where he came from, but now running the Hyundai Rally team. And what's going on? Anyway, there we go. Peter, you've noted that top drivers like Max and Nigel Mansell focus purely on racing, trying to ignore the fanfare. Do you think Liam Lawson got too caught up in the drama in his 2 Red Bull races? Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there was that, I did actually show it on the live stream. There was that weird comment he made when obviously somebody had said to him, do you feel sorry for Yuki that he didn't get the drive that you've now got in the Red Bull A team, Liam? And he said something like, I'm paraphrasing now, but it was something like, oh no, I don't feel sorry. You reap your own rewards and I was quicker than he is anyway, or something like that. I just thought that's really churlish. I mean, why couldn't he just say, yeah, I do feel sorry for him. He's a quick guy and his chance will come. Isn't that what you would say in that situation? And I think there's also not all his fault. I think there's a bit of a preening on the Red Bull side as well, isn't there? That you've got to be a cool Red Bull driver with the hair like this and the bracelet and all the rest of it. And I think all that stuff is a distraction. I really do. And Max has done a very good job, as I say, of staying away from that, just being his own guy. And I mean, you'd never get Max saying to an interview, I don't know how that quote from Lando happened, but you'd never get Max saying, oh, I really want to try to be perfect, but maybe I'm realizing I can't be perfect. He'd just get on and drive the race car, keep his mouth shut and drive the race car. We all know you're trying to win the race. We all know you're trying to get the pole. you know, and there's too much of that. There's far too much of that. And I think Liam definitely got caught up in that. And I'm amazed actually, because he had some good people around him who could have prevented that happening. And, you know, he had a mega chance that, you know, Marcus Armstrong was never given, for example, his compatriot and very much his equal for many years coming up through the ranks. And here he is, he got that opportunity ahead of Yuki, and he was just, and I didn't actually, I mean, the one time I would like to have had Liam say something was when he got beaten by Yuki in that runoff when they were doing the NASCAR thing on the dirt oval. That would have been an opportunity to say, well, yeah, you know, when I did the lap, the sun was in my eyes or something, you know. But it was just like, oh yeah, what a laugh, you know, with 2 Red Bull stars here, and you know, that was important. And being nice to people, being humble when you've got the opportunity is a very, very powerful human quality. And I just don't get that with Liam. I didn't get it. I mean, I'm sure he is a lovely, humble guy. I'm sure he is. But the way he was projected at that time, it wasn't very good, I don't think. My Lord, how do you think today's heavy promotional demands impact drivers like Liam compared to someone like Max, who, along with being much more experienced, seems to be able to tune out? Well, I don't think there's an excuse for doing something that you don't feel is going to be good for you as a racing driver. And if you don't have the ability, if you don't have the brain, what's the right word? If you don't have the honesty to be able to say to the team principal or whoever it is telling you to go and do this or say that, to say, look, that's not me. I'm not going to do that. You're employing me as a race driver. I will do my commitments for the sponsors. I'll do my minimum commitments with the media, and that's it. I want to focus on my racing. Any team principal that does not accept that shouldn't be in the job, because everybody's different. Every human being is different. Every racing driver is different. And to start molding them into these sort of semi Netflix movie star stroke sponsorship idols stroke, you know, athlete stroke, maybe a bit of a racing driver in there, is just such a waste. And there's so much of that. A lot of it is to do with money, to do with power, to do with glory, to do with all the things that come with Formula One today, which aren't actually related to doing the job in a race car when there are 1.5 minutes to go in Q3 and you're wondering whether to go through turn 4 flat or with a slight lift. That is the only thing that matters. That is what Formula One is all about. And anything else that detracts from the importance of that moment is a waste of time, in my opinion. Chris McClellan. Hi, Peter. Hope you're well. I've heard you mention the Yuki Liam dirt car promo quite a bit. You do remember 19-year-old Liam annihilated Albon in DTM in Ferraris in actual competitive events, not promo. Yeah, I mean, Liam's annihilated a lot of people, but he didn't that day. And this was the guy, actually, that he then, as I've just been saying, that he then sort of looked down upon when he got the Red Bull A drive. And he needed to be more cautious. Yeah, of course, Liam's had his moments and he's done very well in other environments. Annihilated Albon in DTM. But what did he think about that? Did he think, oh, I've annihilated Albon, he's a megastar? Or did he think, yeah, of course I should annihilate Albon? Wouldn't you think that? He's quite a long corner driver, Albon, and he's, yeah, lovely inputs, very, very soft inputs, but he's a, you know, long corner driver. He's got his weak points as well. I would have thought anyone would ask me, I would say, yeah, pretty close. In DTM, something like DTM, we're very close between those two. So it doesn't really, you know, it didn't mean a lot, that. I mean, if he'd annihilated Max, it would have been another matter. But it was Albon, you know. And the reason I mentioned the Yuki thing is because that was actually the guy that he was racing Formula One with, stroke fighting for the A-team drive with. I don't know. You got 4 you put here, Chris. Okay, I'll do the next one anyway. I know you're a fan of clear number ones in teams, and I respect your point of view. But the downside is it would be Piastri would be at Alpine probably, and George only now moving to Merck. Well, let's get one thing straight. I'm not actually a fan of clear number ones. That again is a misquote. What I'm saying is that if you have a driver as good as, or as quick as, or as great as a Max Verstappen, a Lewis Hamilton, a George Russell, a Charles Leclerc, the best way to get maximum from those drivers is not to pit one with the other. It's to put somebody like, I don't know, Liam Lawson or Yuki Tsunoda in the other car, or Sergio Perez or Valtteri Bottas. That is what I'm saying. In other teams, if you don't have one of those great drivers, doesn't matter. But I'm just saying, if you want to get the best from a Lando Norris, you don't put an Oscar Piastri next to him. You put Daniel Ricciardo next to him, somebody he's just slightly quicker than. If you got an Oscar Piastri, yeah, maybe you can have a Lando Norris now, but you know, you get my gist. So what were you saying? Piastri would be at Alpine. Yeah, but think about it. If Piastri had stayed at Alpine, as obviously the Alpine people contractually felt he was going to do, bearing in mind they announced him as a race driver, by now he'd be in the Antonelli seat, wouldn't he? Mercedes will have hired him and he'd be there with George Russell. And you could say, well, that's not as good a drive. But the point was not at that moment, there were two options there, both of which were completely equal in terms of legality. Which is the better option, McLaren or stay at Alpine? Of course, you'd go to McLaren. But all I'm saying is if he'd stayed at Alpine, he would have ended up in the Merc. He might have ended up Ferrari. I don't know. He might have got the Ferrari drive. Who knows? So, you know, I don't think what you're saying there, George would only now moving to Merc. No, I don't think so. Another one from Chris. Question on 26 and beyond. Stefano Domenicali has enough business and commercial nous, doesn't he, that if the 26 regs are a big flop and drive away fans, they will act swiftly and make changes to the regs? Or is that wishful thinking? Do you think the racing will be okay next year or still unsure at this stage? It might be a profit loss event. Well, I think, it depends what everybody wants from 26. If all the fans are thinking we want much closer racing, I think you're going to be disappointed because there are new engine regulations and new chassis regulations. So by definition, some teams are going to get it right or more right than others. So if anything, I think it's going to be less competitive over the grid. But as I said in the last live stream, I think you'll find, interestingly, you know, maybe a new team, Andretti, or maybe a team that's near the back, Sauber, might suddenly magically get a great power unit electric combination and a great chassis and be running in the top 4 out of the box. That's what could happen, a surprise factor. But in terms of close racing, if you want close racing, you don't change anything. You just let everybody work around the regulations. Eventually everybody comes to the same solution and then you got your close racing. So going to these new regs is not about making the racing closer. It's about, we've got to go more in the electric route. How are we going to do that? If we want to keep all these manufacturers in Formula One or have even more in Formula One, that's why they're doing it. So, and it's not a big question of saying, if the racing isn't close, are they going to make a quick fix straight away? The actual judgment will be, are these power units working and delivering and doing what they should be doing? And this is a technical breakthrough for Formula One. Personally, I don't like the route they're going, but that is why they're doing it. So in terms of close racing, DRS effectively is being replaced by push to pass. I think it's 200 horsepower or something, quite a lot you get if you're within half a second of the car in front. Then you're allowed to have this power thing. It's not an aero thing, because the aero thing is going to be active aero, which again, I've got. There seems to be very little chat about the active aero regulations since the big shunt suffered by Jack Doohan at the Suzuka in the Japanese Grand Prix. And we know why that shunt happened. The DRS was still open when he went into turn 1. And it was still open because he stroked his engineer, and there have been some race engineer changes over the winter. No, actually since China at Alpine, since Pierre Gasly's disqualification in the Chinese Grand Prix. And Jack, having not run in FP1, was obviously in a very fast catch-up mode on a difficult circuit and went into turn 1 with the belief, presumably from the data stroke the engineer, that the DRS would close at the right moment going into 1. But because he started to turn the wheel before he braked into 1, he went in with it open. And that was obviously he survived okay, and the car was rebuilt and he raced on Sunday. But that was an indication of what can happen if things go wrong with DRS. And in the new 2026 regulations, the front and rear wing are going to be interconnected. And obviously there's it'll be a set amount that you can take out of front and rear wing. That's the active aero aspect of it. If something goes wrong and you have more front wing than you want compared with the rear wing that you have, or vice versa. There could be some horrendous situations developing. I'm not a fan of any of that stuff because it's artificial and things can go wrong, and they will go wrong for sure. And then the other point is defining the areas where the active diff is going to be, sorry, the active aero is going to be allowed. And that basically is going to be from simulations, from the teams, from the FIA, and it's basically when the car's traveling in a straight line, but not always. And it might include a flat out kink, for example. Now, a kink that's flat out, may not be flat out for all teams, and certainly might be different between full tanks and empty tanks, or high grip tires and low grip tires. So how they're going to define that from car to car, chassis to chassis, driver to driver, to me, I have no idea how they're going to do that. If they start bringing kinks in straights into the active aero, I think it's asking for trouble. And I've spoken to quite a lot of engineers about this, and they won't say it publicly, but there are quite a lot of engineers that are very concerned about the whole active aero and where it's going in 2026 and the precise ways it's going to, it's going to be policed and where it's going to be allowed, and B, it is by definition prone to causing trouble. So, you know, just replay what happened to Jack Doohan, and you'll see what can happen if there's something not right with the DRS on a car, and that could easily happen again. And as I say, there doesn't seem to be much talk about that. That's the bizarre thing. Sujith, hey Peter, talking about the art of defending, you should check out the defense of Seb Buemi against Antonio Fuoco in the 6 hours of Imola. They clipped the battle in the World Championship. Okay, good. Well, you know, yeah, fine. Pity it's WEC, isn't it? But anyway, I say that because so few people watch it and can enjoy it. But two quick drivers there, obviously. I'm a big fan of both of those guys. They never really, well, Fuoco never had a chance, and Buemi was very, very good, I thought. So, yeah, thank you for that. Sema Dragon, hola Peter and chat. Hola. Hola. Buongiorno. Italiano to Spanish. Arnab Das. Lando Norris has the speed of a number one driver and the mentality of number two. Thanks for the insights, Peter. Well, yeah, poor Lando. I mean, he just doesn't need to talk about it. Just get on with it. You don't have Max doing all that stuff for it. I mean, Lewis is doing the same thing now, isn't he? He's talking about it. He shouldn't. Just don't talk about it. Get on with it. Think Jordan Spieth. Think Jordan Spieth on the 14th. He wouldn't be thinking about the triple bogey he just had on the 13th. He'd be getting on with it. Henry Williams, has Oscar gone back to short corners? Is that why he's beating Lando at the moment? No, and not to my eye, he hasn't. He's just a bit like Carlos Sainz. He's just found a beautiful rhythm with the sort of longer corner, which in his mind, I guess, means slightly safer approach because, you know, he's only going to go as deep and turn in at the rate the car will allow. Whereas with short corners, you've got to be really confident in your own ability to manage the front if the front does start to get away. And I believe Oscar has that talent, but because there's so little testing in Formula One now, he's just got to get on a race, boom, 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 all these races, and so he's just found this beautiful sweet spot with he's braking late as he can. And then he's getting the power on as soon as he can, and then he's using great car control through. And he's got a lovely soft touch. Lovely. I mean, that's what's happening. He's getting a softer touch, I think, than he had. But I do think there's a lot more potential still in Oscar, which is on slower corners. I think he could really pick up even more advantage over Lando if he started to use short corners on the slower bends. And we did see the beginning of that when he was at McLaren. So that is still there to be worked upon by Oscar. And I think Lando's, I still think Lando has a couple of things that he can do really well. But actually, I'm just thinking as I speak, because you ask a very good question. I pointed out that in Miami, Oscar was braking beautifully for turn 27 from high speed, the highest speed the car has on that lap, by coming out of the throttle and for a millisecond, letting the car breathe and settle before he was starting to brake. That's a huge breakthrough, I think, B-R-E-A-K, for Oscar. And that's starting to get into the realms of what Lando has always done very well, which is that letting the car breathe when he's really on it. And this is on Oscar's quickest Q3 lap as well. And that is where Oscar, I think, has closed the gap to Lando. And Lando possibly now is looking at areas where like the entry to 434, which is a very, very edgy part of the circuit to be trying to find time. If Lando's starting to look to find time there, then he's being squeezed now. But I still think Oscar could, be interesting when they get to Monaco to see how they compare at Monaco, to see how, because I imagine Oscar will be thinking of Monaco, how he's going to do that section from the top of Casino Square down to Le Portier, for example, where there's opportunity there to be Mirabeau. You can really be great with short corners there. And then obviously also into Rascasse is another area where he'll be good. They'll both be very good through the swimming pool, through to back. But the tight part of the pool, Rascasse, that's where Oscar potentially has a lot of opportunity now to build on what he's got and to add a little bit more to it, I think. Alex G. Oh, I love these sorts of questions. Peter, and all people out there, and if I give you a time machine, where would you go and what would you do? Well, I must say, reading Bernard Caillet's book, I might like to go back to Pescara 36 and watch Burnt Rosemary in that Order Union. I'd quite like to do that. Also, in Bernard's book, he talks in detail about the 57 German Grand Prix, when Fangio in the less powerful Maserati against Peter Collins and Mike Hawthorne in the two more powerful Ferraris decided to start with a lighter fuel load to make up for the power differential. So he had a power to weight ratio was about the same, and then come in for a pit stop for fuel, which the other two Ferraris obviously weren't, and then try and win the race. And it was an elongated pit stop. Things didn't go right. And when he rejoined, there seemed to be no chance that he would catch the two Ferraris. And yet he did. He's taking 20 seconds out of them a lap around the Nürburgring. And he eventually won by 3 seconds, I think, from Mike Hawthorne. And Bernard Caillet talks about going into Fangio's hotel room, knocking on the door after the race. And Fangio was just lying there on his bed with his hands over his chest, just completely relaxed. And Bernard said, "Wow, what a day. How did you do that one?" And he said, "Well, there was a section of the lap, on that last lap, when I had never taken a specific corner absolutely flat in fourth gear. And I thought, if I don't do it now, I never will. And I did it. And the car took off and landed sideways, but I managed to hold it. And I realized then that I'd gained a couple of seconds that I had never had before. And that gave me the momentum to pass Mike on the last lap." I'd quite like to have been at that race, I think. Nürburgring 57. I don't know. Any Jim Clark race. Clermont 65. Any of his Dutch Grand Prix wins. I'd love to have been at Silverstone 65, actually. Richie Ginther on the front row in the Honda. And yeah, 65 would probably be my year. But everybody else is open to say what they would like to do, where they'd like to go. Tales of the Ancestors. That's a good name. Hey, Peter, if Lewis needs a visit to Rob to regain his mojo, are you in a position to nudge him in that direction? Well, no, not really. I don't think he listens. I don't think he would listen to me anymore. He lives in a completely different stratosphere, doesn't he? I do know some people at Ferrari, obviously, and I've talked to them. They said, "Oh no way Lewis would do that. No way." He just, and I'm not surprised, as I said, because 7 times world champion, he's got this far without having to get anybody to help him, a coach, if you like. So why would he think now he would need it? Obviously, the answer is, well, you're not doing very well. But he would think inside, oh, yeah, but I can do it. Next race, I'll be fine. That's how he is, and that's what he would do. So I just can't imagine he would even think about it, let alone pick up the phone. And just to be clear, Rob hasn't been well recently, but I spoke to him last week, and he's still doing Tuesdays and Thursdays, driving up to Bedford, I think. Bedford or Hethel are the other two tracks he's using. And he's doing quite a lot of drivers now, Porsche Carrera Cup drivers, a few rally drivers, and a few guys from America. He's doing really well. And there's no reason why any of the current guys, Formula One guys, couldn't be with Rob. Obviously, he'd push aside his diary and focus on whoever wanted to be there if it was an important guy. But I don't think any of them will, apart from Lance Stroll. Sema Dragun says, oh, she's talking to Arnaud Dazier. The moment Lando said this year was going to be his year, I knew he'd put his foot in it. Well, there you go. While on you, Pete. While on yo, Pete. Okay, thank you very much. Got it right. Howard Keane. Hi, Peter. South Africa calls power outages load shedding. You quickly learn to carry on. Yeah, I think we all shed quite a lot of load, didn't we? All that internet rubbish. I was reading that, and what else was I reading? Um, oh yeah, Raymond Chandler books immediately rise to the surface, don't they? And you start reading a bit of Raymond Chandler. So there we go. Sema Dragoon. That would have been very scary. I guess you're talking about doing 335 kilometers an hour at Pescara in an auto union with no seatbelts or helmet. Yeah. Or maybe you're talking about Sami Pahari hitting the guardrail in the Canarias and looking very calm afterwards, like, oh yeah, hit the guardrail. It's a bit like the race engineer for Max saying, right, I've got no front end, the back's bouncing all over the place, the engine's cutting, and I've got terrible ups and power shifting. Understood, Max. I love that. What does that mean, understood? I'm really intrigued to know. I wonder if Max ever says, when I said all that stuff and you said understood, did you mean understood, we'll fix it now? Or did you mean, yeah, we understood what you said, not much we can do about it? It's just, I can imagine how, I mean, I must say Max is quite patient, because I think if Patrick Head had said that to Nigel, there would have been a serious conversation during the race about what indeed Patrick had indeed understood. No, got no power, the skirt's broken, and this is no understeer. Understood, Nigel, understood. What do you mean understood? So there we go. Zishan Afar. Peter, do you think Fernando will have a chance next year, or will Father Time catch up with him? He would be the oldest world champion of recent times at 44 if he did win it. Yeah. Wonder what Lewis would think of all that then, if he won it at the age of 44, Lewis's favourite number, in an Aston Martin. A car that presumably Lewis could have got himself into at some point. Yeah. I don't know. As Father Time caught up with Fernando already, I suppose, is the real question. He seems to be lagging in points compared with Lance, doesn't he? Maybe Fernando should go and see Rob Wilson. Yeah, right. That'll really happen. I don't know. All I can say is for sure Fernando's doing all he can within the Stroll family to make sure that he's in that Adrian Newey car in 2026. I can't think there's anything in the world he wants more than to be in that car. He'd probably even take a salary cut, I would think. No, it wouldn't go that far. But no, pretty near. Sema Dragoon, I'm scared of a power outage on the Formula One track at night. Yeah. Well, remember the first Singapore Grand Prix, when a few cars, when they went over a certain part of the track, there was some sort of, I don't know what was going on, but some sort of power outage as well. They went going over the metro line, and all the different electric currents all interacted, and the engines cut out on the Formula One cars. Mega. Yeah, well, if he must have these ludicrous street circuits, what do you expect? I say ludicrous. Singapore's wonderful, isn't it? Miami, I'm slightly less ebullient about. When they said, Miami Grand Prix, I really thought they'd be running up and down South Beach, doing something really quite cool. All that business of the arena and everything. I think it's sort of car parks and service roads and a few bits of public road, the arena. Yeah, all right. Anabdas. Peter, if we put Jim Clark and Max Verstappen in capital letters in Mansell's title-winning car, who would come out on top? Well, is Nigel not allowed to drive as well? Well, don't forget, Jim Clark is a 3-pedal driver. Max is a 2-pedal driver. Jim Clark is a hand-foot coordination expert. Max only has to use his hands to steer the car. So there's the first thing. So we're going to the paddle shift 19B, and it would feel that aspect of it would feel pretty natural to Max. And to Jim Clark, you'd think, what are all these pedals all about? Where's my clutch? And so, there's that. But then again, Jimmy, I'm sure, would embrace a paddle shift, particularly after having to hold the steering wheel with only one hand, going through the master kink in the wet in a Lotus 33, because he knew the car was about to jump out of gear, and the only way he could have the opposite lock ready would be to have his hand in the position he needed in order to get the opposite lock flat out in top gear in the wet. He'd think, yeah, I'm kind of glad I don't have to do that too much more. So he'd like that. I think, you know, being completely serious now, don't forget Jimmy in the Lotus 58 Formula 2 car that never raced. It was a wedge-shaped Formula 2 car. This was the car Jimmy would have raced in Formula 2 in 68. Was Jimmy spec'd a second brake pedal so he could left foot brake. And it was literally just a second pedal. It wasn't, you know, it didn't, in terms of the brake balance and stuff like that, it was very crude still, but it did allow him to brake with the left foot. That was something Jimmy wanted to do. At a time, I guess, when Erik Carlson was pioneering that with the Saab in rallying, and Jimmy had his ear on the ground to rallying, of course, and did the RAC rally in 66. So Jimmy would love that whole left foot braking, paddle shift. And both Max and Jim would love a car that is always at optimum ride height to generate the maximum amount of downforce. And so, yeah, I would say Jim Clark by about a tenth over Max Verstappen. Right, we've got a super chat here. M.A. Khan, Peter, you were the only person in the media that said emphatically Leclerc will beat Lewis. How were you so confident? Is Leclerc another Mansell, massively underrated? British media are now blaming the car. All I ever said was that I think Lewis will win races in a Ferrari, but if it comes down to a championship, if it's a championship winning car, of course it's going to be Leclerc, which to me isn't particularly sticking my neck out. It's pretty obvious, isn't it? He's been with Ferrari for quite a long time and he's super, super quick. He is a short corner driver and he's quite capable of being as good as Lewis ever was. If he'd had the same career path, and equally could still win a lot of championships. The guy is unbelievably good. Yes, he's got faults in other areas that Lewis doesn't have. He's much more emotional about his life and his driving and his racing. But then again, you know, he lost his father at a very impressionable age. He's driven for Ferrari and Italian teams all his life, and they're always quite histrionic and emotional. Whereas Lewis has been, you know, with British teams and had a much more solid base, if you like. So, yeah, they're very different in some ways, and Lewis is a lot better in some ways, those areas particularly. Well, was anyway. But in terms of technique, I've never said that Lewis is a lot better than Charles Leclerc. Leclerc's very near Lewis, very, very good, but makes mistakes, as we know. But that's part of that other side of his, you know, the way he is. He's an emotional guy and sometimes it gets away from him. But technique-wise, I've never, you know, from the millisecond I saw Charles Leclerc in Formula 3, I thought, wow, this guy is unbelievably good. And that was all to do with short corners and touch and the way he moves the car and the body language in the car. So, yeah, there we go. Thanks for that question. Rotten steam. Just rotten steam. Mr. Windsor, with all the talks about Formula One going back to V10s lately, which then got dismissed again not long ago, what would you prefer, current and next generation hybrids or return to the V10? Well, absolutely return to the V10, although it wouldn't be the same because the V10s would then have to be redeveloped and rethought, and there would be, inevitably, there'll be some sort of gesture towards hybrid and all that, I guess. I've always said, and you can go back through all my videos, is that one of the biggest mistakes ever made was when Formula One killed the V10 engines because they were super reliable, relatively cheap, and gave us great competitive motor racing. A bit loud, I have to say, you know, okay, but earplugs kind of did the job. And they were very impressive to the general public. So they all went away because of the big fight between John Todd and Bernie Ecclestone. When Bernie hung Todd out to dry in the Bahrain Grand Prix, Todd didn't want to go. Bernie convinced him to go. Todd did go. He was chastised publicly, globally, for going and putting on a race when there's a civil war. And in return, he decided to start Formula E and kill V10 engines. And Formula One went hybrid and the whole thing was a mess as a result. You know, Formula E should always been a part of Formula One, in my opinion, should have been part of the package like Academy is today, so that Formula One teams could show that they care about the future and electric cars, but at the same time we should have kept Formula One just for pure racing engines and not diluted the essence of Formula One: tires, fuel, noise, power, cornering. We shouldn't have diluted any of that by having to go hybrid and semi-electric. Let Formula E do that for you. That's what I've always said. And had Bernie and Todd not done that and not had that fight, then probably Bernie would have continued with V10s, V8s, and then whoever bought it then probably would have continued the same way. But because that, it all went away. Very sad. Warland says, I have a Yaris GR, very fun car. Wow, you say that again. What a great car. I often think, what would Jim Clark think of a car like an i20N Hyundai or a Yaris GR if he got in one of those? If Jim Clark was super impressed by a Ford Anglia with a Ford twin cam engine in it, which Chapman gave him to drive once just to test the new Ford twin cam, Lotus developed, of course, what would he think of a Yaris GR, four-wheel drive? And you see the latest thing, and this is what happens when you've got a really cool guy at the top of a company, and it's Toyota's credit, I think, that they are doing this, because he drove the Yaris GR the other day and he was trying to do some handbrake turns with a normal handbrake. I thought, it's a bit difficult. Let's do a new GR with a mega electric handbrake, e handbrake to the right, like the rally cars, which they're going to do now. There's going to be a new version of the GR Yaris, four-wheel drive, and it's going to have basically a fly handbrake on it. At the same time, you've got all these other manufacturers going, ridiculously off rails, designing and building cars that are just embarrassing, and you've got this guy building these wonderful rally, and Hyundai to some extent are guilty of taking their eye off the ball now, because they did the i30N, the i20N. They should be developing both of those. The 20N should have a 8-speed sequential option as well, and a handbrake option, and it should also have a four-wheel drive option, but they're not doing it because they're focused so much now on the whole electric car market. Yeah, boring. Jazzet Aviat, hi Peter, love what you do. Thank you. Please keep going. Would you rather than the team or drivers championship? Team championship? No interest at all in the constructors championship. I know the constructors love it because it's related to money and their survival, but the only thing that matters is the drivers championship, isn't it? We all worry about who's going to be world champion and how he's going to represent the sport. Is he going to be a good world champion? That used to be the question in the old days. Is he going to be a good world champion? Is he going to really advance the sport and really have the sport's interest when in his championship year, when he's won the championship? They don't ask those questions anymore. It's just, I'm number one, I've won it, and I'm world champion, and that's it. The time was when world champions did feel a responsibility. And today, a responsible world champion, you could argue, might think, right, I'm going to go on a world tour now, and I'm really going to try and talk about Formula One in all the parts of the world where they don't have a race, and try to encourage young kids to take an interest in motoring and safety. At a time when, for most young kids growing up, the thrill of driving a really cool car has just gone away because there aren't that many cool cars around anymore, and most of the roads are quite boring and everyone's going electric. So it behoves us and all those in a responsible position to try to capture that flame again of people wanting to drive a car like a GR Yaris, aspiring to that, I think. And for all those out there saying, oh, Windsor's just, he's talking the rubbish because we should be trying to save the planet. I mean, the efficiency of that engine says enough. I mean, it's an unbelievably good engine in that GR Yaris, as it is in the Hyundai i20N. Very efficient engine. And so my son was telling me about, there's a new Lambo, I think it's a Lamborghini. It's a V12, normally aspirated, but it's got a hybrid element, brake hybrid, I think. So it's a V12 and it does 5 litres per 100 kilometres. That's how efficient these engines are now. So there's no embarrassment in going that route, in my opinion. And I, when you see the technology actually in place, like on the Yaris GR, then you think, well, the only thing I'd say was, and go back to Hyundai, if they'd run the standard i20N, they probably would have done a lot better on the Rally Canarias than the ones they had by the look of it, because mine handles unbelievably well. You got slight understeer, and then you just come out of the power a little bit, and the car gets perfectly neutral in the mid corner. It's just beautiful. The nearest I've ever come to that is the Lotus Elan. It's a beautiful car to drive, the Hyundai. The team championship ensures money for all and affects the constructor's bottom line. Maybe Zach is right. In fighting for the drivers' championship, he's ensuring that at least win the... Is that what Zach said? Yeah, but that's not very nice to Lando, is it? His second son or third son or whatever. You know, you don't just say, oh, well, you know, those two can fight it out. And if we lose the drivers, at least we won the constructors. Like, you know, a bit like, it's just like Williams in 86. You know, they had the best car. And who wins? Alan Prost. Because Nigel and Nelson took so many points from one another. Got another super chat here, I think. It's from Michael McLaughlin. And it's just Australian, I think it's Australian, $10. Thank you very much, mate, with no question, just a thumbs up. Thank you. Very kind. Don't deserve that. Taylor Martin, good morning from Toronto, you petrol heads. Good morning, Canada. And big elections over there now. So all done and dusted. I've always got the Canada hashtag on my description. I'm behind you guys, whatever. Rotten Steam kind of agrees with me. If anything, qualifying has been one of Norris's strengths. Exactly. You know, and here he is saying, oh, you know, I'm trying to be perfect. Maybe I'm imperfect. Get on and drive the car, Lando. Just enjoy it. You're not going to have many cars as good as this in your racing career. Believe me. Just enjoy it. Stop faffing about with microphones. Sarosh Soman. Hi, Peter. What's your comparison between Hamilton and Michael at 40? For Michael still drove the same way that is early in, turn on the brakes, etc., whereas Ham has changed. Unable to understand why Ham has changed. Yeah, well, I think he's changed because it was the only way he could get any sort of confidence with the tyre management on the Mercedes. It was such a small operating window that driving with short corners on the Mercedes became a gamble. He just, from one lap to another, he didn't know whether he was going to be able to rely on the front or the rear. So he just thought, right, call it quits. I'll just brake a little bit deeper into the corner, by which I mean straight line, and then turn in. He's braking later, longer into the corner, or longer distance, but braking later and then turning in later. And that way he was on top of the tyre by the time he'd sort of loaded up the car. He knew what the car was going to do. It wasn't quick, but it was the only way of driving that car with any sort of confidence, given the terribly small operating window they had for the tyres. And he's done that ever since. I first noticed it, may not have been the first time at Spanish Grand Prix, about 23. And I don't think he's ever changed because the car's never really got any better. Obviously, in different weather conditions and other things, as things change and things have got better with the car. Sometimes they have a much bigger operating window, some race weekends. But he's never really gone back into doing what he used to do up to the end of 21. So that's why he's doing it. And now he's in the Ferrari. I guess he got a bit of a shock in the Barcelona test when he went off. I guess he thought, right, I'm in a Ferrari now. This feels really good. And then he had that big shunt anyway. It wasn't that big, but it was a shunt. And he thought, whoa, this is sort of Mercedes territory again. I don't want to make a fool of myself anymore. I better just drive this thing as I've been driving it on the Merc. Good job. I've had all this training doing it on the Merc this way. This is what I'll do with the Ferrari now until they really give me a decent front end and a decent back end. And so there we are. We've got a decent front end, but it's even more pointy at the rear. And that's the only way you can drive it. Whereas Charles is threading the needle on a Friday into getting the car about as good as he can get it so that he can then start driving with short corners over the weekend. And he does that really well. As I say, he will continue to make the odd mistake because the knife edge on which Charles is operating is so sharp that it's impossible for any human being just to keep that up as consistently as he has been for the last couple of races. But he will always have the edge because he's finding that edge. A little bit like George with Lewis as well. But George wasn't doing it with short corners. George was just doing it because his margins were just much smaller than Lewis's. And he was doing everything with more commitment, particularly when it came to, blind fourth, fifth gear corners with crosswind. George was always going to stay flat if the car could take it, whereas Lewis was going to give it a bit of margin. So that's where we're at. And going back to Michael, I don't know, the Michael at Mercedes wasn't particularly impressive, was he? I think that was Michael, still short corners, you're absolutely correct, but with margin, definitely with margin. Just, again, ticking the box I mentioned last live stream, or maybe the one before, about how a 40-year-old in any aspect of life, let alone driving a racing car, is always going to think a little bit more about what he does than a 20-year-old. And it's just weighing the pros and cons, the profit and loss, win or lose, and the gamble you may have to take, and the odds thereof. And you're going to think about it more. In any corner which is slightly on the edge, you're going to think about it. Whereas at 20 years old, you wouldn't. And I think that was what we saw with Michael. That's what we saw with Alan Prost. Alan Prost, but in 84, alongside Nicky, was right on the edge. But in 85, he'd learnt from Nicky how to drive that car in a sweet spot that always guaranteed he'd be out of the first corner in good shape, and also that he would finish the race and not to focus so much on qualifying. And that was Alan Prost finding his sweet spot. And that's why he won a lot of races against Senna, because he did have that sweet spot that he could rely upon. Still short corner driver, a bit like Michael. But Michael, the car wasn't quite the car that obviously the McLaren Porsche was in 85, 86. A, and B, the Mercedes was, well, Nico Rosberg, was on top of he's on top of it in a sort of younger generation computer-esque way that Michael didn't adapt to and couldn't, understandably. So I think that's what happened there. Brabham Oz, less thinking, more driving. Yeah, absolutely right, mate. Couldn't have said it better. That's the sort of thing Jack Brabham would say. Yeah, less thinking, more driving, mate. Yeah, get on with it. Not here to talk, we're here to race. Yeah. Yeah, Mark Webber's like that too, isn't he? Was, when he was racing. Mark spoke quite a lot, I suppose. Yeah, and he vented his feelings with the whole Vettel thing in a way that I don't think Black Jack would have. I mean, think about this. Black Jack Brabham won the 66 World Championship with his own car, designed and built by Ron Toronac and Jack Brabham, and had Denny Hulme, a young rookie, in the other car. Okay, Jack in 67 has a very quick car again, his own car. The Repco engine's even better, more competitive against the Ferrari and not that far away from the Cosworth. And Denny Hulme's in the other car. Denny wins only 2 Grand Prix, the Monaco and the German Grand Prix. German Grand Prix by default after Jim Clark retires. Monaco, he drives well. And Jack has a few blow-ups and issues, but he's super quick. And Denny wins the championship. I mean, imagine how annoying that would be if it was your team, it was your car, you designed and built it, was your name, and the teammate takes the title without anybody noticing, really. And yet Jack didn't say anything about it. He was just completely, oh yeah, good on Denny, beauty. But I know he was seething inside, for sure. But he didn't say anything about it. It was, oh yeah, good, yeah, let's go to the next one, mate. Yeah, beauty. And so it went on. It's a question of what you decide. A, it's what you say, and whether you should say anything at all. And B, what that does to you internally. Even if you're trying to say, I'm not going to get worried about this, the minute you say it, your psyche takes over. A bit like, again, there's another parallel, which is the 66 Indy 500, which Jim Clark and Colin Chapman felt 100% Jimmy had won, and the lap scorers got it wrong. And the reason they gave the win to Graham Hill, which was the initial winner with the checkered flag, was because Jabby Cronbach had brought over Dean Delamont, I think it was, from the RAC to help with the lap scoring. And both Jabby and Dean had Graham winning that race. And they knew that Jabby was the world's greatest Jim Clark fan. So if Jabby was saying Graham had won the race, then fair enough. They just didn't say any more. They just congratulated Graham, went to Graham's party in Mill Hill on the Monday or Tuesday after the race, and everybody celebrated. Fast forward to, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, Nigel Roebuck, good friend of mine, is in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Lodge, hotel, motel on the racetrack. Just going there because it's a great place, very 60s. And he's in the coffee shop, and there are some old USAC officials, boys, all having lunch together. Big salads. And one of them saying, yeah, it was just like that time in 66 when we had to give the win to Graham because there would have been so much, so much rubbish if we'd given it back to Jimmy. Of course, we all know Jimmy won that race. Roebuck's ears are pricked up, and all of a sudden we have confirmation Jimmy did win that 66 Indy 500. But so far as Jim Clark's concerned, it was Graham Hill's day. And he never said anything. And then you could say, oh, well, in that case, Windsor, you must be delighted with what Toto Wolff did after Abu Dhabi 21 when he didn't say anything and let Red Bull and Max get on with it. Well, to me, that was a different thing because it was very public and it was a very open thing, and it was very clear that a rule was broken. In 66, nothing was clear. I'm going on here. 63, it was clear though. I mean, it was very clear that if a car puts out oil in the Indy 500, the oil flags come out. And yet Parnelli Jones was leaking oil in the closing laps, and no oil flags came out, and he won the race from Jimmy Clark, who'd backed away thinking, oh yeah, the oil flags are going to come out. Nothing happened then either. I don't know. You tell me. Too many instances of different things happening. My brain's addled. No, it's another one feeling the same way. Rottenstein. Drivers today are so young, their brains probably aren't fully developed. Lots of feelings. So he's talking about Liam, I think. But yeah, that's no excuse. It's like blaming other people when you do things wrong. You take blame for yourself. We're human beings are way ahead of other animals, so we shouldn't complain about being not ready yet or whatever. Benzie News' showdown. It's sprint week, minimal setup time and potential for chaos in Florida. Yeah. Pirelli trying to put a brave face on it, saying, oh yeah, it's really good though. Although we have no setup time with the cars, at least we'll get a proper glimpse of how they're going to be in race conditions when we see them in race conditions in the sprint race, and they're still allowed to make adjustment changes. Of course, we should remember that they'll be running much less fuel in the sprint race, so it's a completely different car. But apart from that, yeah. I don't know. It's been about time we gave up on all this sprint stuff. I was hoping they had. I'm not a fan. Never have been. Never will be. Walloon, it's too much social media and these kids need to think through and process everything. Yeah, too right. I agree. Jono Nick, in that Saudi Arabian first corner incident, would Max have been given a 5-second penalty with a wheel-on-wheel touch before going straight on? Well, bottom line is there's only room for one car going into turn one. Yes, of course, two cars can go through if the guy on the inside gives them lots of room, but you're leading a Grand Prix off the line, it's got the pack behind you, you're Oscar Piastri, you're in the middle of the road, Max is on your right. What are you going to do? You're going to suddenly move way over to the left to make sure Max has got room? No, you're going to edge him a little bit, not too much that the stewards are going to get annoyed. And there, Bob's your uncle. So if Max had been wheel-to-wheel level, I don't think that would have made a difference. I think the only thing that would have made a difference would have been if Max had stayed a little bit longer going into the left and allowed Oscar to touch him once they both started turning the steering wheel. And then you've got the sporting code telling you you're not allowed to force another driver off track. And I think maybe that's what, in the heat of the moment stroke, great hindsight, that's maybe what Max could have done. I still think what he should have done is just given the position back to Oscar as accelerated out of that corner. Making sure George Russell doesn't sneak past. That was the drama, wasn't it? But it would have been difficult to do because of the George thing. And I'm sure Red Bull argued that. Well, they should have if they didn't. Jonathan Wheatley would have had he been back there, or had he was there still. But I don't know. I think the solution is they should have started, Max should have had the privilege to start on the left-hand side of the road. That's the solution, as I keep saying. The pole winner should be allowed to choose on which side of the road he wants to start. Well, what's the problem with that? Why don't they get on with that? Don't see any mention of that in the 2026 Sporting Commission meetings. Nothing. Not Christian Zeron. Bring Il Leone out of retirement. Yeah, Nigel Mansell. I've actually got an Il Leone jacket. Never worn it. They only had it in one size. That's large, extra large, I think, and it's so small I can't even get near it. Probably fit Jack perfectly, I would think. So anyway, yeah, Il Leone, bring him out. He's too busy playing golf at the moment and playing very good golf. I think he's, well down below zero. Another one wanting predictions here. Benzie News' showdown. Peter, which drivers will be in the top 3 World Drivers' Championship standings at the end of May after 9 races, including Miami, Emilia-Romagna, Monaco and Barcelona? Well, I mean, it's going to be the two McLaren drivers and Max, isn't it? I would have thought George will be near and Charles will be near, but I think those three still. Can't see Max going off the. I can't see Red Bull going off the boil. If anything, they might get a little bit closer to McLaren. Max will be Max. Lando's going to win some races. Oscar's going to win some races. So, thank you. Good night. Slipstream Merchant. Hi, Peter. How much influence do you think Michael Schumacher had on Max growing up? Given he's Max's godfather and they spent a lot of time together, I see a lot of Michael in Max. Yeah, I think Joss had a lot of influence on Max and his tough upbringing and fight to get to where he wanted to be. I think there's a lot of Joss in Max, and I think there's a lot of Michael in Max in the single-mindedness, only focusing on the things that matter. And when you've got a spare moment or two, you go back and do things you enjoy, like karting or in Michael's case, riding motorbikes and horses and things. But yeah, keeping it simple. As complicated as Michael's life was, or apparently was, he was actually quite simple in the way he led it. He just wanted to be out, in a month off, he'd go to Montana or something and ride horses with the family, wouldn't he? And it's the same thing with Max. I think he keeps life very simple. There's none of this gut-wrenching, agonizing mental geography or Olympics that Lando Norris indulges in. None of that. The race is over. And he was able to do that pretty well after the turn 1 shunt in Saudi, wasn't he? That's how he's able to put that behind him and drive the race he did. It was, okay, I'm very, very annoyed about this, but I ain't going to worry about it because it's the next lap that matters. It's this whole Jordan Spieth thing. Don't talk to me about the double bogey. Talk to me about the birdie, please. That's what Lando should be doing. He should be talking about Miami last year, not what happened in Saudi Arabia. Jason Voorhees, I just hope Piastri wins and not a Brit. There are too many British drivers in top teams. Well, that's a bit of a silly comment. I never ever judge a driver by his nationality. Why are you even bringing that in? Does it matter? I mean, think how many good British drivers there were in the 50s. Did that annoy you? Tony Brooks, Mike Hawthorne, Peter Collins, Sterling Moss, Roy Salvadori. Why is that an issue? Why not celebrate anybody who's got the talent to be there? There's a big difference between patriotism and nationalism, and that to me sounds a little bit nationalistic, to be honest. Sorry about that. Rottenstein. Also Ericsson in Monza 2018, when his DRS was stuck open in the braking zone in turn 1. Horrendous crash. Well, there you go. Another one. Marcus Ericsson, yeah. Who's done very well in America, isn't he? Yeah, things, and we take for granted DRS because occasionally we hear, oh yeah, I had a problem with the DRS, it wasn't opening properly, and we hear that on the radio, and that's why he wasn't quick on the straight. And it doesn't result in a shunt. But we all had a rude awakening with the downside of DRS with the Jack Doohan shunt in Japan, and that's something that we should be taking very, very seriously as we go into 2026 and what we're planning to do with front and rear wings, and making sure there's no issue between the two parts of the car. Because believe me, if there's some sort of hydraulic glitch or whatever system they're going to use between the two, then we could be in for a very, very scary time. Ishan Malak. Hi Peter, there's been a lot of talk about drivers running out of battery halfway down the straight, and it concerns me that we're going to see economy runs with highway passes. Well, yeah, and the teams, I think, now sort of decide where they want that to happen, and they, out of this corner or this corner, or do they want it at the end of the straight where it's least destructive? That's usually the place. I think McLaren were doing it out of turn 22 in Saudi Arabia, and yeah, I don't know. It's all so boring as well, isn't it? To have to rely on things like that, and motor racing should be about, if you've got a great corner exit, you got more revs, you got more speed, and then you enjoy that and you accelerate through the gears to top gear and you get the benefit all through the range. It shouldn't be about, oh, when are we going to have to cut the engine and do this and save battery power and harvest energy? I know that the big manufacturers are all saying, this is what we want, this is what Formula One must be, harvesting energy. But it's about time somebody said, well, I'm sorry, that's not Formula One. We want Formula One to be about racing and fast engines and revving them and getting the best from them if you've done a great job on the exit of a corner. That's what I think anyway. It's so irritating, all that stuff. J999, hi Peter, what are your thoughts on Hamilton's move to Ferrari in terms of how the sport is evaluating? From how I see it, Hamilton's move is selfish and making the sport more about marketing. Do you think the same of does the importance still matter and how it did before? It's not the first driver to go to Ferrari for marketing reasons, I don't think, or for the wrong reasons, let's put it that way. And so there's nothing really out of ordinary there. I think it's the ordinary. I think it's more Lewis's stage of his career and his attitude and what he expects of himself and of the team, and that's it. And I think, as I said on the video I've got out at the moment, I think Lewis will win some more races, and I think he'll do okay. But it's a question of expectation. If people thought he was going to go there and blow Charles Leclerc away and win an 8th world championship, I think they're going to be disappointed, because that was never going to happen. And I don't think Lewis needs to think that way in order to drive well. I think he just needs to relax and enjoy the opportunity he's been given. Was it a mistake? Yes, I think it was. I think they should have kept Carlos Sainz. I don't see at the moment where Lewis is doing a better job in the race car than Carlos Sainz would have done. And I think for all their differences, I think Charles and Carlos were a very good combination. Very good. You had two extremes there of what they wanted from the car, and the car was getting better. I think Lewis is probably confusing them at the moment, because they've got a pretty good car for Charles, and they think it's about as good as it can get, maybe with a few refinements for this year. And there's Lewis saying, oh, it's too pointy for me. The back end's too loose or whatever, unstable. And that's a distraction. I don't think Carlos Sainz would be saying that if he was in that car right now. So in that sense, I think it is a mistake. And obviously, marketing-wise, I don't know. Are lots of people out there buying Ferraris now because Lewis is there? I don't know. Maybe. Or put another way, are fewer people buying Mercs because he's not there? That's an interesting one, isn't it? I'm not sure Merc's doing that well at the moment, is it? As a company, compared with previous years for other reasons, German motor industry and stuff. But all this marketing stuff, it's all a bit overrated, isn't it? Wallon, well, he's being a bit unkind here. So much yapping by Lando. Every day it's the same message with different words. Well, yeah, it does come under the heading of why doesn't he listen and just not say anything? It's what we're actually recommending. Octogrammaton Wilkenstein de Dreisent 1. I was listening to a podcast with Giorgio Teruzzi and Pino Allievi. They had some nice things to say about Carlos Reutemann, some funny anecdotes as well. I'm not surprised. I don't know Giorgio, but I know Pino very well. And Carlos had a lot of time for Pino Allievi, for sure. What Allievi say about me this week, Windsor? Tell me. Why Chimorosity is so bad with me? Why? What happened? What happened with Enzo? And so, yeah, lots of great Carlos stories. I've got lots of great Carlos stories too. And Pino's one of the great journalists as well. Lovely man. Mohammed bin Mahfouz. Hi, Peter. I have a question regarding Parc Fermé rules. Are teams allowed to make changes during qualifying sessions, like setup changes? No, they're not. Once they're in qualifying, they're in Parc Fermé, and they cannot do anything to the car. During the race, you can make small adjustments, and before the race, you can make small adjustments to the front trim tabs, and if it's the weather conditions have changed, you can do regulatory ride height and brake duct changes. But in terms of Parc Fermé, you're totally locked in. And just as a reminder, it used to be that in a sprint weekend that they go into Parc Fermé before the sprint race, and then they stay effectively in Parc Fermé up to the Grand Prix start. Now they've changed the rules that after the sprint race, they're out of Parc Fermé and they can make more changes prior to qualifying. But once the qualifying starts, that's it, you're done. Nishant Raj Vibhu. Hi, Peter. Max achieving so much at this age, possible participation and wins in other racing formats, his ongoing efforts to launch his own GT team. Do you think he could become the greatest of all time, of all motorsport? Well, Sterling Moss didn't do too badly, did he? Sterling Moss Automobile Race Team very quickly burst into life after Sterling's retirement. And during his race career, we had British Racing Partnership, which was founded partly by Alfred Moss, Sterling's father. And indeed, Sterling drove for that team during his career. So he had quite a lot going on, and they weren't all Formula One races, and it was record breaking and sports cars and all sorts of things, Formula 3 that Sterling did. So yeah, what you could say is could Max follow in the footsteps of Sterling Moss? That's the way I'd phrase it, and do all these things. Yeah, probably. He's still very young. He's very, I mean, I can't imagine Max Verstappen being very enthusiastic about a race team and the car and doing this and doing that, and not actually driving it himself, but watching other people drive it. I just can't imagine that happening. I suppose it will at one point. You know, he's so ageless, Max, isn't he? You just want to see him drive a car forever, really. Benzene uses Showdown. Finally, some praise for Oscar and his potential. Well, I've always been saying Oscar's good. I've never ever said that he wasn't good, very talented, right back from Formula 4. So, or you mean compared with other people? I don't know. I don't know what others have been saying, but Oscar's extremely talented. That's the reason I said from day one, when McLaren hired him, this is a big problem for Lando Norris. Nishant Raj Vibhu. I mean, greatest personality, at least one of the greatest known personalities in all of motorsports. Yeah, well, obviously, more people know about motorsport these days than ever before. And if Max was going to do WEC or World Rally Championship or GT or whatever, obviously it would give a massive lift to those categories as well. Because Formula One has basically dominated and swamped all forms of motorsport to the point where there's very little interest in them. There's nobody watches. How many people watch 6-hour WEC races on TV these days? Yeah, a number, but nothing like Formula One, and that's the problem. Whereas in the old days, it was very even. After the Belgian Grand Prix, everybody focused on Le Mans. Everybody. And a lot of the Grand Prix drivers were at Le Mans. It doesn't happen anymore, though, really. Yeah, I suppose Le Mans is quite big, but it's not big by Formula One standards, though, is it? Jeb Brown. Is it safe for international participants to travel to the US given the political instability? If it's not, the races should not be held. Well, that's a good question. I remember when the whole Brexit thing happened, a lot of the teams were saying this is not good for Formula One and it's going to make a big problem for us. There doesn't seem to be much talk about that now, but I guess they've just absorbed all those extra costs of the carnets and all the custom stuff they have to do, which must be so irritating. All I can tell you is that from the point of view of the Formula One exhibition, which I was involved with, there was something like well over £500,000 worth of additional fees purely because of Brexit, going from England to Spain for the exhibition. So I guess, you know, we're talking about America, tariffs on Formula One, tariff on foreign parts. Everything's foreign, isn't it? Imagine if they Trump started tariffing Formula One. That'd be good. 134% tariff on every Formula One team coming into the United States. Yeah, but I think Liberty are very close to Trump, aren't they? Aren't they part of the Trump thing? That's why he was at a race. Probably will be. Probably be in Miami. Wilf's Wanderings. Hi Peter, love the chat. Are there any similarities in Jim Clark and Max? Keep up the good work. Oh yeah, a lot. As I say, you know, Jim Clark was a farmer and went farming between races, and Max is a race driver and drives karts between races. So there's your similarity. No, and beyond that, very similar approach, I think. Jimmy used to get quite het up if things were unfair or unequal occasionally. I've told you the story about not going into the Duckham's hospitality suite at Snetterton in '66 after he'd been invited to the race to start one of the races. I do that because it was a flag start, because he didn't have a pass to get in, even though he was Jim Clark, by then double world champion and Indy 500 winner. But he refused to go in because he hadn't been given an official invitation. Is Max like that? Probably not, actually. But having said that, I think Max has got a certain dignity about him that is Clark-like, in that he just is what he is, and he's quite honest and doesn't have a lot of side to him, and none of it is for show. It's just, this is what it is. And I think Jimmy was like that. I was rewatching the video, you can see it on YouTube, Jim Clark and the Ford Corsair, Corsair, which was the big new Ford 466. And in it, Jimmy looks, and he's driving the car, you know, on boards as well, and he looks very, very precise, and he's wearing a suit and tie with a handkerchief in the pocket of the suit, and everything's very correct, and it's a great video. If if you're a Clark fan, you'll love it. But it's interesting. I thought, why don't he's wearing the suit to do that? And then I realized, of course, it was probably the same day that he did the photo shoot for David Bailey with Jean Shrimpton, who was one of the top models of the time, which was paid for by Ford. And in the back of the photo shoot, in every shot, there's a Ford Corsair, just the front of it. But Jimmy and Jean Shrimpton are propping up a tree and looking into one another's eyes and doing these very cool things. And the suit, actually, when you see it as photographed by David Bailey, is very much a Rat Pack suit. Great short lapels, small lapels, nice small collar tie, everything's narrow trousers. I mean, very cool. But in the Corsair, it looks kind of out of place. But then Jimmy would have thought, oh, well, I've got this very nice suit. I think I'll wear it. Look good when I'm driving the Corsair. He didn't speak like that, obviously. I thought that was great. Quite sure what it means, really, apart from the fact that a suit meant a lot to Jimmy, I think. Probably got a free suit out of the whole thing. And I think those little things probably matter to Max too, actually, to be honest. I think you don't get the impression that Max loves money and wants more and more money and spends it in a bling way. It's all quite secret, which is how it should be. Jack, not my Jack, I don't think, says, hi Peter, in the last couple of years you've mentioned Lewis lengthening his corners. Did Michael do the same when he was of similar age and begin to think more? No, as I said, he didn't, to my eye. He was always short corner driver. He was quick at Monaco, wasn't he, in the Mercedes, and he was quick at Singapore when he had that, just before he had that shunt. And a lot of that was just good short corner motoring, but he was definitely starting to leave more margin, particularly after that Singapore shunt. And I just think he didn't feel as confident about doing that. He wasn't thinking, he just didn't feel naturally as confident. And so he was starting to leave a bit of margin around there, as Prost did. And then he had Rosberg to beat in the other car, So it all added up. But no, Michael didn't do what Lewis did, because he never really had to do that to make a car work. It always kind of worked with short corners for Michael, but it never worked for Lewis at Mercedes post 21. Reto Hanna. Kalle Rovanperä was scary last weekend. With a series of gravel rallies coming up, he will have a minor advantage over Evans in starting order. Do you think he might get his third championship? Well, here I have to put my hand up, and no one will believe me, of course, but my son asked me what I thought the first three in Canarias would be on the Wednesday before the rally. And I said, for sure, Rovanperä is going to win it. And bear in mind, he hadn't done anything prior to that this year. A lot of people were saying, oh, Evans or Ogier. I said, no, this is going to be Kalle. You wait. He'll be brilliant on the tarmac. And of course he was. My predictions for second and third were not as good. I predicted Elfyn would finish second, and he finished third. And I predicted Terry would be third, and he was nowhere. So he got a puncture on the last stage as well. But at least I got Rovanperä right. No, I think Kalle will be very good on gravel as well. I think you'll see him fly now. I think he just took a while just to sort of get back into it after his semi-sabbatical. And I think now he'll just be mega. And I think Elfyn Evans, to my relatively new rallying eye, is a little bit more spiky than Kalle. And I think he's more prone, if he really pushes himself hard, he's a bit more prone to making mistakes that Kalle isn't. And I hope I'm pronouncing Kalle correctly. And so I think he'll be really good, Rovanperä, over the next, all these remaining rallies now. Stand back and watch. I think he could still do it, actually. Telegram Media. Hi, Peter. Do you think Felipe Massa wins his court case regarding the 2008 championship? No, I don't, sadly. I don't think Formula One is quite capable of I don't think the courts would be quite capable of readjusting the championship. So that won't happen. He may get, this was wrong, and it would be some sort of comfort for him, I think. But we're talking about Singapore, right? And what happened there with Alonso Gate. And I mean, to me, it's the same as South Africa 81, isn't it? If Carlos Reutemann's estate ever sued for that championship, I think they'd still lose, because there's no precedent on what the remedy would be. So I wish Felipe all the best there, because I think it was unfair, but it wasn't helped, of course, by that pit stop, wasn't it? It was the one where the whole fuel gantry went down. So they would say, well, that would have happened anyway, I guess. But, you know, we shouldn't forget that Nelson Piquet, before the 81 Argentine Grand Prix, when they had a big lift system on the Brabham, and it was very important to make sure on the slowdown lap that they got the ride height up again, that the Brabham team with Piquet had decided which bit of guardrail they were going to crash the car into if the car didn't come up over the curbs on the slowdown lap. So the precedent was there with the Piquet father, and then guess what? The Piquet son did the same thing actually did it in Singapore. That's interesting, isn't it? I'm sure the two are unrelated completely. M.A. Khan, this is a super chat. Max is left-footed. Is this a benefit hindrance? That's an interesting question. You mean he's left-footed as a footballer or as a water skier? Left-footed. I'm left-handed, but I kick a football if I can, periodically, always miss, with my right foot. If I was water skiing, I'd have my left foot in front of my right. I think these guys race with two pedals from such a young age that the left foot becomes the braking foot and the right foot the throttle foot before they've even thought about it. But it's a good question, isn't it? It's a very good question. You know, is a left foot footballer going to have more sensitivity through the left foot as a racing driver braking? Good question. I don't know how you'd answer that, because the only way would be to compare it somehow. But then Max is so different from every driver, is so different one from another, that you couldn't really make any sort of proper comparison. The only way really to do it would be, okay, Max, now you're going to brake. We'll put the brake pedal on the right-hand side and the throttle on the left. See what happens then. So that itself is an interesting point, isn't it? Because you could say, you know, if the right foot is more important than the left, in the throttle, you're possibly feathering the throttle more than you ever would a brake pedal. Although sensitivity with the brake pedal is incredibly important. But you play, and if somebody's left foot is more sensitive than their right, would it be not logical then to have the accelerator on the left and the brake pedal on the right? I wonder what Adrian Newey would say about that when he's trying to make sure that the pedals are in vertical plane to keep the front of the car as narrow as possible with the throttle on top of the brake. Or Rubens Barrichello would say about it, and that he still wants a clutch because he doesn't want a left foot brake. He wants to brake with his right foot. But that's an interesting point. Rubens always wanted to brake with his right foot. He never braked with his left foot in Formula One. So he obviously felt that his right foot was the one. Wilf's Wanderings. Hi, Peter. How did Raikkonen and Hakkinen differ? I asked Steve Hallam this question not so long ago. And Steve was race engineer for both of them, and Ayrton Senna, and Nigel Mansell. I'm trying to remember what he said. I think he said he thought Mika just would have had it in terms of speed. I think he said. But I've said this before, but I'll repeat it. I think Kimi was more able to drive with understeer than Mika. I think they were both absolutely spot on when they had a neutral or high grip, good balanced car. But if they had understeer, I think Kimi could do more with to get rid of the understeer than Mika. I think Kimi had a much shorter lifespan in terms of being as good as Mika than Mika had, if you see what I mean. I think Mika's lifespan was longer as a great driver. Kimi's was smaller for reasons we don't have to go into. But so I think that, you know, over a longer period of time, Mika was better. They were very similar. Maybe Mika was better in traffic as well. I mean, would Kimi have done what Mika did with Ricardo Zonta when he passed Michael at Spa? I'm not sure. That was a classic Mika thing. But otherwise, both brilliant. Vijay Velman, should Lando go see Rob? Yeah, of course he should. If only to have lunch with him and talk to him about motor racing and driving and life and how to handle this situation. Rob's got a very, very good racing brain. And Rob would totally get. I was talking to Rob about turn 27 after what I'd discussed in the video at the time. And Rob immediately said exactly, well, I was pleased, exactly what I've been saying, which was that all this was two different ways of trying to get the weight transfer at exactly the right rate to give you the best potential for stopping the car and getting the car to where you want it to be mid-corner. And both Oscar and Max were doing it really well, but they were doing it differently. Oscar was coming out of the throttle and then braking, whereas Max was very, very subtly coming out of the throttle, feathering the throttle to the point where the telemetry wasn't even noticing it, losing speed and then braking. Beautiful to watch. I think Max's system was slightly ahead of Oscar's there, but we're talking milliseconds. We're not talking things you can see on the telemetry, but both of them did it really well. And Rob immediately embraced that and loved hearing about it. Bob Smith, 9866. Can you be a greatest of all time? Well, it's a bit of a conflict of terms there. You've got a greatest of all time. You're either the greatest of all time or you're not. So it's the. Can you be the greatest of all time without having driven other series, Le Mans, Touring Cars, Indy? I think you can, because those other disciplines merely highlight how good you are and underline how good you are. They don't actually give you the vote in the first place. So if we talk about just Formula One, you could say because Fangio was never quite as good as Sterling in events like, say, the Mille Miglia, then maybe Sterling has an edge in other areas as well. Or Jim Clark, winning the Indy 500 and Formula One in the same year shows a versatility that Jochen Rindt never had, for example. So you could always use that. But I think ultimately it does come down to a pure Formula One judgment and basis of judgment of the opposition at the time, the cars at the time, the danger factor, how many races there were, the scoring system of points. All those things come into trying to establish the GOAT, the GOAT. Hi, Peter. You praised Verstappen for handling the press maturely after Jeddah. I don't disagree with you, but do you think he's matured on track? He refused to help Perez in Brazil because he thought Perez crashed on purpose at Monaco. He overtook Leclerc off track at Vegas and refused to give it back. And he had the better car. He cut the corner in Jeddah and doesn't think to give it up and try again. Thank you. Well, thanks very much, first of all, for that question. Super chat. Yeah, I mean, we could all come up with 10 things that Max has done that deserve a rap on the knuckle. But then again, he's a racing driver. And that's kind of why I like him, because he does push those limits all the time. And, you could argue that what he did to Perez in Brazil was childish, whatever you might want to say. To me, if you actually feel that is the right way to handle it. You just do what he did in the race. I mean, the alternative is for Max to have said something afterwards about Perez after the Monaco thing, and to have a big shouting match, which he didn't do. He just did it on the racetrack. Okay, he did a weird thing. He didn't let him take the lead, or give the position back. But maybe that was a bit over the top. But in general, it's all racing stuff. It's racing stuff. It's not stuff where he's talking about people and saying things about them behind their back or into a microphone that, is too big. All these things that we've been talking about. He's just a racing driver. And a good racing driver will always want to dominate all the time and want to thrash their teammate all the time. That's all they think about, a good racing driver. And so those things happen. And if you want to live in the genteel world of after you, Claude, and everybody being nice about everybody else and everybody being fair and never doing anything that's in any way wrong with the sporting regulations, then you'll end up being a wishy-washy professional Formula One driver that isn't Max Verstappen. That's all I can say. It's. I know a lot of people would disagree with that, but I think that is why Max is who he is. And it's not, he's not Lance Stroll driving into Fernando Alonso on the main straight of Austin and nearly taking them both out, or doing a similar thing, I think, to Vettel in Brazil the same year or the year after, whatever. And he's not, brake testing people and doing things that other drivers who should remain nameless, I guess, have done. And he's not doing dangerous things. He's cutting corners where he can get away with it. Simple, you know, and he's got a judgment of when to push and when to shove. And I quite like watching the way his brain works, actually, and how he reacts when he's not in a good situation, what he's going to think of and do. Trail break 3R. Charles mentioned having learned tons from watching Sir Lewis Hamilton from behind for years. Yeah, well, he would. He's a very self-critical driver, Charles, and he would have noticed Lewis's early turn-in. I mean, did you see the video I've done about Lewis? It's currently out. I found a picture from Brazil 21 going into the same corner, which is that they go over the sort of brow into the right-hander. They come out of the very quick right-hand, and then there's a braking area into the right. And look how much earlier Lewis is turning in, even than Max in 21. And everybody with their eyes open would have noticed that. And Charles, for sure. But Charles, believe me, definitely had that feel for getting the car in early and how to do that, how to massage the car when he's got a problem mid-corner from a very, very young age. And watching Lewis, yeah, because he's got a brain, Charles, and because he is self-critical and he watches and looks, he will have learned from that. He'll be astonished now, I think, at what's going on. But knowing Charles, he's a good bloke. And if Lewis said to Charles, look, let's go and have dinner. What do you think about my driving? How can I improve? I think Charles would probably really try and help him. Genuinely, I do. Which kind of gives the lie to what I've just been saying about Max. But that's why Max is a different sort of personality to Charles. And why Charles maybe will never be a Max. Because Max would never do that, probably. Never help a guy like Lewis if Lewis is his teammate. Will we, Benzie News, will we see any 25 rookie winning a sprint this year? Yeah, Antonelli could win a sprint for sure. Akio Toyoda, who I was talking about earlier, the boss of Toyota, who created the GR Yaris, is easily one of the coolest people in the automotive world. I would say he's one of the coolest people in the world. I'd love to meet him. I'd love to have sushi with him and chat about cars and driving. He's obviously a top man. He's a quick driver too, I think, isn't he? He's done quite a lot of racing. What a guy to have at the top of your company. There's so many other you know, faceless CEOs these days who are there, bean counters, all there to handle the whole move to electric and all that stuff. And then you got Akio Toyoda doing what he does. What a guy. Everybody should just stop, look and listen, I think, to Akio. He should be president of the FIA, president of Japan probably, and certainly president of any global automotive manufacturers association, probably head of the Olympic Committee too, if I think about it. What's your opinion? This is VJ on Arvid Lindblad. Yeah, I mentioned Arvid a while ago. Very good, isn't he? How does he compare with Dino Beganovic? There's two interesting drivers with interesting names as well. Lindblad looks very good. Benzie Showdown, Miami marketing machine. Peter, are you aware of any interesting stories about Cadillac sponsors, livery drivers? Just hope they give Fred Vesti a chance, bearing in mind he's driving for the Cadillac, whatever it is, IMSA thing out there. So if they couldn't have a better guy in one car than Vesti, I think, and then put an American in the other car. That's what I hope they do. I'm sure they won't, but it'd be nice to see that. Alex M. Sir Windsor. Yeah, right. You talk a lot about Mansell. I remember those. The most dramatic I recall was during the Dallas Grand Prix when he tried to push his car and collapsed. What was the backstory there? Well, his backstory was that his back had given up. It's a bit annoying because I did find a wonderful photo I took of Nigel before that Dallas Grand Prix on the Wednesday before the race with Steve Hallam, his engineer at the time at Lotus, by their DeLorean road car, would you believe? They'd got out of the car and they were just sitting on the wall, one of the concrete walls at Dallas, none of this Tech Pro barrier stuff, and very, very hot, very hot. The story there was that Nigel had 84 Detroit Grand Prix, had qualified really well, got squeezed out between Prost and Piquet going into the first corner, typical first corner sandwich shunt. And Bernie was so annoyed, because it would involve Piquet in the Brabham, that he called for Nigel to be suspended for, I don't know, 6 races or something and be fined some ridiculous amount of money. And that was the build-up to the Dallas Grand Prix. Nigel didn't know until a few days before that he was going to get, I think he got some sort of fine in the end, which is still annoying because it was just, if it had, today that for sure would have been judged first corner accident, no further action. But, you know, because it was Bernie and because it was Brabham, you know, it went on and on and on. And Piquet never liked Nigel even then, obviously. So he goes into Dallas with that on his shoulders and has to be quite circumspect in the way he drives because he can't have any more incidents like that, I guess. And in the race, he was actually in very, very good shape in that Lotus Renault, the Ducarouge car, really good car. And he was with Keke, who eventually won the race in the Williams. He was dicing with Keke, but Nigel, I'm sure Keke was too, but Keke was more on the limit in order to go the pace Nigel was. Nigel could feel, and obviously it was correct, that in the heat of the race, the tyres were a big critical thing. They were going to go off. They didn't stop in those days. And so what Nigel wanted to do was sort of tow Keke and just sort of help one another to get to the last phase of the race and try to look after the tyres as much as possible. And I don't think Keke ever got the message properly because Keke was quite annoyed about all that, and then and didn't really work. And so Nigel's tyres started to go off, but much more importantly, the thing eventually ran out of fuel, I guess. And he was absolutely shattered by the whole thing mentally. That whole race with Keke, trying to get Keke to do what he wanted, and then the whole thing stopping towards the end. And so classic Nigel, rather than do anything else, his gut reaction was to try and push the car across the line in that intense heat. So that was the backstory to it. Not sure it's that significant a backstory, other than it's just a classic Nigel Mansell race that I think is quite underrated. But it did get a lot of pictures in the paper the next day, I guess. And that race, of course, started at 11:30 in the morning because it was so hot in the afternoon, so, which meant the warm-up, which was a compulsory part of the programme, was at something like 6:30 in the morning. Jacques Lafitte famously arrived at the track in his pyjamas. So yeah, they were the days. Very good Grand Prix. I love that Dallas Grand Prix. It was a great atmosphere. The city did a brilliant job. And of course, Bernie then whipped it away and that was it. Never saw it again. There was some argy-bargy over money, as there would be. But it was a great Grand Prix. Arshad Zahangir Chowdhury. Will Hadjar replace Tsunoda next year? Everybody's saying, isn't it good Yuki's got the drive and there he is doing half a reasonable job. He's just a good number 2 to Max, isn't he? He's a sort of Sergio Perez version 2. Maybe not quite as quick or as good out of slow corners as Perez in terms of traction and managing the rear tyres. And as we saw in Saudi Arabia, committed one of those cardinal sins of turning right before you turn left. And what was that all about? I don't think the Piero Taruffi book, Technique of Motor Racing, I think it was called, was translated into Japanese. Probably not. I've got the English version. It was definitely in Italian. And in there, Piero goes on at length about what he calls the transitory curve and how it should only be used very sparingly in very, very one-off situations. And I don't think Turn 27 Saudi Arabia was what Piero had in mind there, the entry thereof. So, yeah. Anyway, is this the peak of Yuki Tsunoda we're seeing now? It's a difficult car. He's got to keep his nose clean, and therefore he's going to be, on any given day, 3-4 tenths slower than Max, whereas Hadjar potentially might be a little bit nearer, but has a lot more potential to grow as a driver. Yes, you're probably right. He probably will go there, I suspect. If Red Bull were keeping Honda, maybe not. They're going to Ford, so it's a different deal. I keep wondering why Red Bull did such a big thing for Honda in Japan, actually. Is there still some hope that if the Ford engine thing falls through, that they can have the Honda as well as Aston Martin? I don't know. Maybe there's a backstory there for the Tsunoda thing. Dutch UK Racing. Dutch UK Racing. Wow, what a cool thing. Ben Pon, Porsche 906. Rob Slottermacher. Did I ever tell you that Rob Slottermacher was very good friends with John Whitmore, Jackie Stewart and Jim Clark? And that when Jackie and Jimmy lived in John Whitmore's flat in Balfour Place in Mayfair in London, beautiful flat that Whitmore owned, and the two Scots lived there, became the Scottish Embassy. On one famous occasion, Rob Slottermacher came over from Zandvoort. I guess he lived at Zandvoort, and started doing donuts outside Balfour Place. I don't know what he was in, but those days Rob Slottermacher was about the only guy in the world that did donuts, and he could drive cars on 2 wheels for like a mile as well in a straight line. One of these mega drivers, and yeah, Jimmy and Jackie woke up in the morning, looked out, and there was Rob Slottermacher doing donuts outside in Mayfair. Had to be early in the morning, I guess. You could do those things in those days. Daniel, good afternoon from Dubai. Daniel, Ricardo, maybe, if it is. Hey, Daniel, hope you're doing well, buddy. Taylor Martin, thank you, Peter. Thank you. Rottenstein again. Button and Hamilton also took a lot of wins points from each other. 3 wins each, one of their years together. That's 6 wins that could have gone to one driver. Yeah. I think, to me, that was a pretty good driver combination, though. I don't think Lewis was at his absolute best that year. And I think Jensen was fabulous, wasn't he? He was so good. Canada, Spa. I mean, and that was the thing, that Mercedes did have a really good back end, and it was a great car. And Jensen, with a good back end, was a seriously good racing driver, quick racing driver. So I kind of forgive Ron for putting those two together. I don't think it was as volatile as Prost Senna. I think Jensen was always, I suppose here you got to say, the personality of the driver does matter a little bit. And Jensen was, you'd always be happy to have Jensen in the other car, I think, if you were a Max or a Lewis or a Charles. Jensen Button, oh yeah, good bloke. Well, he's not going to cause trouble. And you could look at his telemetry in a way that's quite helpful rather than annoying, probably. And one thing I've always said, Jensen had the most, in terms of lack of overlap between throttle and brake, and lack of overlap is a good thing unless you actually are trail braking. Jensen was as good as it ever got in Formula One history. Absolutely zero overlap, perfect coordination. Benzie News says, Peter, congrats on a chat free of trolling. You guys are more aware of it than I am because you see all that stuff and I just see the next question and I get a bit confused. But I think my manager's done quite a good job of keeping them away, out of the chat box. VJ Velleman. What does Hajar do with the front end that has impressed you? I've seen that you've been impressed with his use of the front end. Yeah, I just think he does. He definitely gets into corners earlier than Liam Lawson. I mean, and you've always got to compare it with the teammate because that's the guy in the same car for a start. So he's definitely in there earlier, and he was earlier than Yuki as well when he was alongside Yuki. He's definitely got it, and you can saw that in Formula 2. I would put him pretty near Antonelli in that area. He's possibly better than Antonelli on fast corners as well, actually. I still think Antonelli's got some issues with high-speed corners. I'm going to be really interested to see Antonelli through Beckett's this year at Silverstone, see how good he is there. Compare his entry speed to George Russell's. But I think Hadjar will be good there. I think Hadjar's very good. Very good. He's in good shape too, isn't he? I mean, he's quite emotional. He's French and everything, all that stuff. But he looks like a race driver to me. Roger Cadell, I very much enjoy listening to your live streams. Thank you very much. Thanks for doing this. Thanks, Roger. It's very kind. Gonna have to wind it up soon. Steven Sabino, greetings from Mozambique. Wow, greetings to you. What are your predictions for this weekend? Do you think that this will be a turnaround for Norris, especially since a wet race and qualifying? Is that what they're predicting? Wet race and qualifying? Really? Yeah, I'd give it to Norris this weekend. Just by the law of averages, I think he'll have a good weekend and things will go more or less according to plan. And he will have the best car for sure around Miami. He and Oscar will have the best car. Now, what you say, you don't think Oscar will beat him? I just think Lando will have a good weekend and I think Oscar might have the odd glitch. And it's a question who qualifies ahead of one another, really. That will define the race, I think. And I just got a feeling it'll be Lando. And I don't know. I think Max will go well. Again. I think it'll be a Lando race. Michael McLaughlin, how do you think Max would go in another racing category if he left Formula One, considering he's a top sim racer in several categories? Oh, he'd be excellent at whatever he decided to do. Karting, GT, Super GT in Japan, Super Formula, NASCAR, Baja 1000, Paris-Dakar, whatever. Is it? I think it's Paris anyway, it's just Dakar, isn't it? He'd be good at all of those, for sure. Rallying, WRC2 with his dad. Ronak Agrawal, hi Peter, what's your view on Lawson's performance? Is he going to stay in Red Bull even or dropped out of this seat? Yeah, disappointing. I think he's the driver now that he was in Formula 3. when he was really talented and great car control, and you thought, wow, this guy's going to go a long way. He's got amazing car control. But he never blended that car control with all the other things you need to be able to do with a race car, and drive it when it's bad, and cure the understeer without destroying the tires, and shortening the corners when you can, and develop as a driver in a logical way. He's the same driver, and that's a lot of that is the way motor racing is today. You get this sort of ticket to ride quite early on. You're a Red Bull driver or whatever, and you get on this thing, and oh yeah, the next car's got to be this and that, and whenever the car's not right and you don't go well, oh, it's got to be the car, the engineer. It's never you, and there's not a lot of growth as a driver given the system that most of the Formula One teams operate these days. And the absolute corollary of that is, Rob Wilson's doing Porsche Super Cup guys and WEC guys, but he's not doing many Formula One drivers. And why? Because they think, oh, we've got it all, we can't learn anymore. It's got to be the team, got to be that, got to learn this. It's never them. And I just don't think he developed very much as a driver, or has developed. He can still do it. He's got lots of time. He's young, lots of potential, obviously, very talented, but he needs to be a lot more self-critical than he is. And I don't mean that in terms of attitude. I mean that in terms of physical things he does with the race car. Reto Heiner, a 40-year-old leaving more margin than a 20-year-old. We saw this with Ogier this weekend. Yeah, we did. I mean, in fairness, I think Ogier drove really well. I mean, he shouldn't really have beaten Elfyn Evans. I mean, Elfyn should have beaten Ogier. And Ogier is very good, obviously. But yeah, Kalle Rovanperä. I mean, the big question is why Elfyn Evans was upstaged by both of them. But Kalle is a class act. And it's not only bravery and what a young 20-year-old can do. It's also flow and skill. Kalle reminds me a lot of Kimi Räikkönen when Kimi was at his peak. Alex M, do you remember Helmut Marko driving racing? How was he? What was his temper? Yeah, he was quite... I remember him well. I remember him in sports. I remember him in Formula 2 and Formula 1, and spoke to him a few times before he had that big shunt at the French Grand Prix, which sadly ended his racing career, 72. And he was... Nicky I knew reasonably well by then, because I'd been a big Nicky fan, just reading motoring news in Australia, 6 months old, but nonetheless following Nicky. I really liked Nicky. When he was in one-on-one with Helmut Marko in 2-litre sports cars, I was a Nicky guy. But I had total respect for Marko, particularly in that Springbok series he did in the 2-litre sports car back end of 71. And he was super quick in that. Drove with Ed Swart, I think. Yeah. And then there was... Oh, no, it's Jody Scheckter, Ed Swart, Helmut Marko. Can't remember who Marko was driving. But anyway, Marko was really quick in that Lola. And then I got to know him when he drove for BRM. And he was Nicky without a laugh, I guess is about the way to describe it. He wasn't in any way angry or over the top or shouting and screaming. Not at all. He just seemed to be a little bit humorless, that's all, I guess. Compared with Nicky, who would always have, Nicky would always be doing something stupid. Whereas Marko was quite a serious player. But quick. What sort of driver was he? Very, Nicky could do more with the front of the car. You didn't often see Nicky in power slides or doing much with the rear. Marko was a lot driving on the rear of the car. So he was a sort of Carlos Sainz, Liam Lawson-esque driver. Something between Liam Lawson and Carlos Sainz, I'd say, as a driver. But quick. And we saw that at Le Mans, you know how quick he was at Le Mans in 917s and so forth. He was a serious racing driver. Benzi Showdown, the Repco V8s, yeah. Repco V8s. Wonderful engines. Especially that 67 when it had the exhaust coming out of the centre between the V there. I love that engine. I remember standing next to Jack's car at Warwick Farm in 67 when Roy Billington was just warming it up, and they just used to hold the throttle slides with a screwdriver and just go like that. And it sounded, I remember thinking, I heard it from quite the other side of the paddock when it was being fired up, and I ran over as they were running it into the Esso tent there where they had the cars, and Denny's car was next to it. And it was like, wow, 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 wow. And it was just louder and louder and higher scream, higher revs. Just the smell of the fuel, the oil, the grass, the sunshine on the grass, the beer tent nearby, the whole thing, the SO flags, blue sky, Denny, Jack. Oh, and there's Jim Clark. Oh, no, that's Jackie Stewart. That's Pierce Courage. You know, they were the days. Jack Brabham had it right, says Benzie News, especially in this day of social media chatter. Say that again. I can't imagine Jack ever being on any social media platform. Why would he? He's too busy building race cars and going motor racing as a race driver. Why would he want to do that? What's all that social media rubbish? No. Ron, we got the car ready yet? Yeah, come on, let's get in the back. Come on, let's go. Yeah, priorities were priorities, and they were the right priorities. And Jack had it in spades. Another super chat, James. Hi, thank you very much. Could you see Alonso and Max competing in Le Mans? You mean together? Yeah, probably. Probably. I think Max would think Alonso's still quite quick, and he's done Le Mans. He's got a few things that he can tell me and help us with, and I can do what I need to do. And so, yeah, they could do. I don't know. Depends. I could see it doing with his old man, really, wouldn't he? Max with his old man. Wouldn't that be better? Valun, Peter, would modern Formula One drivers be faster in old Formula One cars or vice versa? Re the Max in Nigel's car. Modern Formula One drivers be faster in old Formula One cars. Faster than what? Faster than the drivers of that era? Or not? I don't think anybody could drive a Lotus 25 faster than Jim Clark, even Max Verstappen or Nigel. So there's that. Could Jim Clark drive a Red Bull RB21 quicker than Max? Probably not. Yeah, the eras define really how you want to think about drivers. It's very difficult to take a driver out of an era and think about how they would go. I mean, I've been talking about Bernd Rosemeyer, or was earlier. I mean, Rosemeyer was unbelievably quick. People would say brave, but again, you know, Sterling Moss always said, if you're a great racing driver, bravery doesn't come into it. You're anticipating what the car's going to do, and you're at one with the car. And I always like to believe Rosemeyer was under that heading as well. So, you know, people, Nuvolari, Rosemeyer, Caracciolo, Varzi, Boyo, Fangio, Gonzalez. I mean, so many great drivers. It's so difficult to compare them over eras. All you can do is sit back and enjoy what you're watching. And we're watching, Lando Norris, please note, somewhere near perfection from Max Verstappen. But he's never going to be perfect any more than you are. And at the same time, we're watching guys like Charles Leclerc getting better and better, somewhere near Max. And Lewis perhaps slightly over a hump now. And let's enjoy it. And George Russell. Lewis is still going to have good days. George Russell's going to get better. Nick says, was a huge Tasman Series fan and loved Brabham saying he was the best to ever do it. Yeah. Well, Tasman Series was something we'll never have again. And I'm so lucky that I was a part of that. And Jeff Sykes was the man that was instrumental in those early days of my career in motorsport. And he was the architect of Warwick Farm, where one of the Tasman races was held. I think most drivers agreed it was the most enjoyable and best race circuit of the 8 Tasman venues. Warwick Farm was just superb, and I was lucky to be there. That was Sydney, my town, and I was out there and doing it and watching them all. And Bankstown nearby is where Jimmy learnt to fly, Jimmy Clark, and there was so much toing and froing with the drivers at that time. It was summer, we were on the beach as well, and everything was just so vivid and alive. Brendan Lee, do you think ground effect cars have led to early braking style to stabilise the cars? A net result, Lewis struggles as a late braking is where his confidence comes from. Well, I don't think Lewis has ever really been a natural late breaker. I think he's been in his mind, he's a late breaker, but I don't think he's a late breaker in the Liam Lawson sense of the word. I think he always has been a relatively early breaker, focusing on the transition point that he's trying to break into, and how he's manipulating the car down to that in terms of weight transfer and manipulating the steering and the throttle and the brakes. But now he is one of his areas where he has to be quick, has to be late-ish braking, because he's going to turn in pretty wide into the corner. I don't think ground effect. I think ground effect cars affected it for Lewis because Mercedes built such a bad ground effect car from 22 onwards. Had Lewis been in a Red Bull, I think he'd probably be driving pretty much like Max now. But because it was such a dog of a car, no offense, Dexter, then I think that's why Lewis has suffered. It's coincidence that it was the ground effect era that induced Mercedes to build such a bad car. It's not the ground effect per se, if you see what I mean. DeLong 86, hi Peter. In your opinion, if Hamilton's poor form continues, would it be a good idea for him to call it a day at the end of the season to make way for a younger driver like Behrman? Well, as I say, he's going about as well as can be expected to some extent. And if he's enjoying himself and he's under contract, and I hope he is enjoying himself and he's being paid a lot of money, why would he stop? If that's what they're paying him to do, you know, drive the way he is, kind of, then he should keep going, I think. From Lewis's point of view, I don't know, you know, it's a difficult one. If Lewis, as I said before, you know, if Lewis had been asked to go to Ferrari with no retainer whatsoever, only on prize money, he would have said, no, forget it, you got to be joking. But if he had said yes to that, he would probably be driving differently to the way he's driving now. Interesting point. So the question is whether Lewis inside feels happy and comfortable with what he's doing at Ferrari. And I think there are a lot of things there, hopefully, that he is enjoying, the whole Ferrari thing. And he's won a sprint race. He's had a pole as well for that sprint. And then he's highly likely to win another Grand Prix or two, to win a Grand Prix or two this year, if not three. Two, let's call it two. So on that basis, you'd say, well, probably not quite as good as Carlos Sainz, but not bad considering all the other stuff. We're getting benefits from Lewis being there. And from Lewis's point of view, it's not his fault that he was offered the drive. They offered him the drive. This is the contract they gave him, offered him, and they negotiated, and that's the one he signed. So he should just sit back, relax, and enjoy. And as I said in the video, the more he relaxes and enjoys, the better I think he will drive, and the more he will go back to being a gut instinct driver who does get into corners a bit earlier and can sort of kind of do what Charles Leclerc's doing. So it'll be interesting to see. In terms of Behrman, I think he's doing very well, Oliver. And if he doesn't get the Ferrari drive in 26, he's got lots of time still. It'll happen for him. If not the Ferrari drive, something else. I think he's proving to be a driver that's got a real potential, and good luck to Oliver Behrman. Angus Burston. Kimi had short corners at McLaren. Kimi wanted oversteer on entry into corner, unlike Max, who rotates the car mid-corner. I'd love if you'd watch more onboards of Kimi. Well, it may look like that, but no, what Kimi wanted is exactly what Max has. He just wants a car that he wanted a car that he could rotate at exactly the right moment and rely on the front and the rear to do what he knew they were going to do based on the manipulation he was doing. And I think they drove absolutely spot on, very similar ways for that small window in which Kimi was at his very best at McLaren. And just in terms of onboards, there's very little you can judge from onboards that actually add up to the differences between Max and Kimi going towards a rotation point. And a good example of that is Adrian Newey doing a day with Rob, just so he could expand his mind. And he's done many days with Rob. And saying to Rob, Rob, I was thinking about what you were saying about Kimi going into the corner early and the way he uses the front and manipulates the front. It was really good, particularly into turn one at Indianapolis. I was watching the onboard. He was really good. But then the following lap, he did it in a different place, different way. And then the following lap was different again. He's very inconsistent. And Rob looked at him and said, no, he's not inconsistent. That is the beauty of Kimi Räikkönen. He's feeling the car every lap in a slightly different way. He's braking slightly differently. He's turning in slightly differently, and he's allowing for that. And his actual rotation point, as you want to call it, Adrian, is slightly different every lap as a result. And that's the absolute art of how to do it. That's exactly what Max does. So I would be careful with onboards of just looking at one and thinking, oh, this is what he does, because the whole point of this is the sensitivity and the feel of being able to manage all the dynamic weights required to get the car into a rotation point that is correct. And the correct rotation point is the point of least possible downside when you got to do this really, really ugly thing and rotate the car and basically, you're not going in a straight line. And it's not a V corner either. Don't get that wrong. It's definitely a curve in and it's definitely a curve out. It's not a Vettel thing. It's not a Jean Alesi thing. So Kimi, to me, was absolutely where Max is. And Kimi's touch and feel on exit was probably better than Max. Right up there with Perez. Incredible linear progression of power onto the loaded rear. But then that kind of went away, as I say. So, but we're just talking about Kimi at his absolute peak. And so, I you know, for me, all I can say is they're very, very similar when Kimi was at his peak. Max and Kimi, almost interchangeable in terms of talent, what they were doing. Okay, so there we are. Thanks very much, everyone, for all that. And I've learned a lot from you guys as well. Great questions and lots of food for thought as we go into Miami this weekend. So see you with the usual videos on Friday. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to TrackNinja, OEM Exclusive, and of course to REC Watches for their support of this channel and this live stream, of course. And see you all very soon. Thanks for watching.